You could obviously adjust depending on size and shape that you're going for. So first thing I'm going to show you how to do is roll slab, and then we'll look at the grid paper after that. So this slab roller is an awesome tool. It has this big wheel on one side. It has a very delicate pin in it, so if you're ever using it and it feels like it's not going quickly or easily, you want to stop and adjust. Usually that means the clay that you're working with is a little bit too thick. These wheels on top are going to bring this center silver roller up and down, and there's a little measurement guide on the back side of this that kind of tells you how tall, how high, or how low it is. So how thick or how thin of slabs you're ultimately working. Right, Mom?
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking sauce.
There are two pieces of canvas that your clay is ultimately going to sit in between to help keep it from sticking to the metal roller. So you'll get your slab of clay, your pre-wedged clay, and kind of make it into a pancake using the palm of your hand as best you can to make it nice and flat. Sometimes I'll even turn it over just to make sure it's nice and even. Then by simply laying a second piece of canvas over the top and kind of matching this top edge, taking out any wrinkles, because any wrinkles that exist in the canvas will ultimately be pressed into your slab, and you don't want that. I like to open it up quite a bit, meaning really open space. That just helps you kind of push through your canvas to the other side. And once you have it both on the other side, then you're able to make it smaller to make your slab a little thinner. There is a guide on here. There's a black line that says 3/8 of an inch. That's kind of the place where we feel like it's a really good thickness. That is the same thickness as this. So if you want it to be this thick, Jordan, this thick, 3/8 of an inch. If you want it thinner, of course, make it smaller. If you want it thicker, make it a little bigger. You don't want to work too much thicker than this, otherwise it's hard to kind of get it together. So then simply once you get it to the guide that you want, you're going to pull the canvases until you feel that clay catch. And then you're going to, just like a steering wheel, start to pull that wheel towards you all the way through. And it's going to flatten out that piece of clay in there. You could go back the other way if you want. I'll just do that now so we could all sit on this side. And then once you lift up your canvas, you have this beautiful, nice, even slab of clay. Works best if the clay is nice and moist, so add lots of water, and especially if it's nice and soft. From here, you could take your clay slab back to your table to work and just transfer it that way. I'm going to work just on top of here so you guys could all see. I like to take a sponge to my slab piece because the canvas does create a little bit of a texture. And using a sponge or a rib tool, you're able to make it nice and smooth. Now, one thing to note is when you're working with slab straight from rolling it, you want to be really mindful of not pressing your fingers in too much, because you want ultimately that slab to stay nice and flat. Even as you're working with making your mugs, you're going to want to make sure you're not messing too much with the slabs as you get going. So grid paper is going to be a helpful tool to determine a nice even shape and determine height and diameter with the cross. When you're using grid paper, the taller, however many boxes up you go, is of course how tall it is, and then how long it is going to be how big of an opening. So if you want a tiny little cup, you would want to make it not so wide. If you like the idea of a big monster mug, then you'll want to make it much longer. And you could attach grid paper together or use larger pieces of paper. Later, when we go into like appetizer platters, you may want to use multiple pieces of grid paper for even one wall. So here, I'm going to just determine, I like the shape of this, so it's about this high. So I'm just going to simply cut it to be that high. And I don't know if this should be long enough. Yeah, it should be good. So then I'm able to just put that grid paper right on that clay surface. And then using a fettling knife, and then will you grab me a ruler from behind you? Using a fettling knife, thank you, I am able to cut out the body of my mug. I just put pressure on a ruler. The wooden slots under sink 4 are really helpful too. And you're able to cut a nice clean edge all the way around. That is ultimately going to be the body of your mug. Now, one thing that you're going to want to make sure you think about is you're also going to need to be cutting a base of your mug. So you may want to roll a bigger piece of slab to consider your base as well as your handle. But the handle, depending on what size and shape you want, can just be made out of scraps of clay too. So now I have this rectangle of clay that ultimately is going to be the body of my mug. And the way that that's going to happen is I'm going to turn this very gently. This is why it's helpful if the clay is nice and soft and gooey. And I'm just going to be very gentle with it. Again, not pushing too much into it because we don't want to mess up the surface quality. Otherwise, you're going to have an uphill battle trying to get it smooth again. And essentially, I'm just going to simply guide it to where the seams ultimately meet again. And I'm just going to kind of let it set up here for a second while I work at building the base. Okay, ultimately we are going to slip and score this together and we'll be able to kind of mess with it there. As far as the base goes, I'm going to use this extra clay to my advantage. If you had it all rolled with slab, it's really easy to just continue with that same slab. But I'm just going to make a pancake here. Nice, smooth pancake. And this red cookie cutter here is the exact same size as the base of this particular mug, so it works wonders in being able to match it up with a base. What's nice about cutting the base with a cookie cutter is that you know it's a perfect circle, and so when you are attaching your mug to the base, you're able to use the parameter of this cookie cutter to help you make sure your mug is nice and circular. So you could use it as a guide and move your slab around it to make it match up perfectly. Does that make sense? Make sense there? And so ultimately, then you know you have a perfect circular shape. So we're not going to attach the base yet. When we want to go to attach this together, it's quite simple. Again, you want to be mindful of pinching it. This is really nice and soft and smooth. Don't do much of the detail work until it gets a little bit more leather hard. But essentially using a fork, stylus, needle tool, fettling knife, you're going to want to scratch up that edge where they meet, some little X's on both sides. This is actually quite soft, this clay, so slip is probably not essential, but you could put some slip in there if you want. So I like to kind of get these edges, sort of think of it like zippering them up together. Let them meet. You're going to be able to kind of adjust the shape a little bit, and then I like to kind of just sort of pinch those two together and even sometimes scratch those together and then smooth them up after. A modeling tool is a really helpful tool to pull some of that clay into each other over and over and over again. You can see how if I took some time and attention, I could get that looking really nice. On the inside edge, so you can see the inside edge there, you're going to want to do something similar where you combine those two together. On the inside edge, I like to actually take a long skinny rope, coil. I like to take a coil, I'll roll it out about that thick, and I actually like to kind of flatten it out. I don't like it to be super bumpy. And then if I lay that all the way in, and kind of pull off the edges, and then if I were to take that modeling tool and take half of it to the left, half of it to the right, you're able to blend that in. So now you're creating a nice smooth transition from the slab where it meets. Oftentimes too, this joint here If it's a little bit unsightly or there's any kind of errors, that's often where I will attach my handle. This is where those two walls met. It just kind of makes it less obvious that there was any sort of imperfections there. Okay, so then you could work at doing that. Once this kind of sets up a little bit and loses a little bit of its moisture, then you're able to attach it to the base, in which case you want to slip and score all the way around. Wherever you're attaching it, slip, score, 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 a little bit of slip. You're able to set it on there. And then honestly, I just like to take the wooden modeling tool and simply pulling the clay up from the base. You could see if I went all the way around, can make it look really beautiful, really clean. The sponge tool is a perfect tool to help hide any of those imperfections. And now you have this wonderful base that looks really clean. Then what you're going to want to do, if I had this all put together, you can see that on the inside edge you still have, it's very obvious where the wall meets the base. In mine here, I have put a coil down at the bottom so that you don't have that look. Can you see how this one, it's very obvious where they meet? You want to eliminate that. It doesn't look that nice and it looks unfinished. And that is very easy. All you need to do is take some soft clay, make a coil, nice even coil, and by simply making kind of a clay donut, you kind of need to sort of guess. Sometimes I'll just kind of, I'm going to use this as an example. Sometimes I'll just sort of throw it in there. Just kind of throw it in there. And then I'll use the modeling tool to kind of move it around, push it into the edges, and ultimately your goal would be to take half that coil up into the wall and half that coil into the base so that you can kind of smooth out that inside edge where they meet. Will you hand me one of those spongies on the stick? They're like hanging in that thing. Yeah. This tool is a really helpful tool to get down into those areas. You could wet it, and once you put it in, you could spin it around a bunch of times, spin it all the way up. This tool I feel like helps me a lot when I'm making mugs because it can get all the way down in there and help smooth it out. Okay, last step. And again, if your shape isn't this exact shape, it's still a great place to start because you could then start molding. You could press through this surface if you wanted it to pop out at all, if you wanted to add any three-dimensional features. Somebody last period was working on like a tiki head. So they started with a slab and then they started pushing out and molding. So it doesn't have to be a perfectly cylindrical shape. You could adjust it from this point. It's just a way to build with even walls. Then the last step you want to do, or really this step could happen at any time, maybe while you're waiting for your walls to set up, is your handle. Now you could cut a slab handle. Oftentimes I'll just cut out another piece that I like the shape of just to make sure it's nice and even, and then you could cut it in the same way that we cut our walls. You could do a coil. Maybe yours is some sort of sculptural shape. And ultimately, when you get your handle, use a sponge, make it nice and clean and smooth. Maybe you like when it's squared off and you kind of use the table as a guide to square it off. You're going to want to determine what shape you want. This obviously is way too small for that size of a mug, but you're going to want to determine what shape you want. Let's say you want just a traditional C shape. Then usually overnight, or if you get this done at the beginning of the period, let it set outside. Leave it on its side on your board for it to lose some of its moisture. It's much easier to attach a handle that's leather hard than it is when it's all super gooey, because gravity's not your friend when you're trying to attach something. It's just gonna wanna droop down. But once it gets a little stiffer, it's gonna make your life a lot easier. We will watch another video that kind of tackles attaching handles, but essentially once this got firmer, you could determine where you want to put it. You could even trim the edges so they're nice and neat, and then ultimately you would put it up next to the surface, give yourself some guides, and then slip and score slip and score, a little bit of slip, you attach it on, and I like to take a little bit of excess clay anywhere that they join and attach it around it, just go all the way around it, and then you could blend that clay both into the handle and into the base to give a nice smooth transition from the handle into the base. So if you want it to have that nice kind of casual transition, any additional decorative elements I just added, I just took a piece of clay, I made like a little, I don't know, quarter I guess, and I just put my thumb in it, kind of cleaned it up, made it nice, and then I just stuck it on the handle, blend, using a wet paintbrush, clean it up. You can see how you could attach some different handles. Your handle could be like an S shape, it could have this kind of fun little ball on the end, lots of different things you could do with handles. Biggest thing is whenever you do sculpt it, you do want it to lose a little moisture so that it's easier to attach. Cool, makes sense? Sponge is a really great tool for up and around the edges, cleaning up those edges inside and outside. Don't hesitate to use a sponge. It really just helps make this outside edge nice and rounded, because of course if you're gonna use it as a mug, you don't want it to be nice, too sharp. Cool. It's awesome. So if you have any questions about how to use the slab roller or how it might help make the shape you're going for, come see me. Otherwise, there's plenty of clay in the back, and give it a go.